Hello and welcome to the No Balls Podcast. I'm your host, Patrick McDonald, with me co-host Finn McDonald. Today is, I guess, an honorable mentions episode for the top 100 list for the MLB that's about to come out. This list is made exclusively by me. Just a little bit more on just these list topics that are going to be happening a little bit more. Finn is going to have a top 50 list of his own coming out next week. Along with that, there's going to be the start of the top 100. I'm going to release it incrementally. The first 25 are going to have their own YouTube video, and then we're going to have a podcast episode talking about those 25 guys and Finn's 50. And then the next week I will release my next 25 guys. So it would be 100 to 76, and then 75 to 51. And then we'll have we probably won't have a full episode on that one. And then the next week we will have my top 50 coming out in its own YouTube video, and then we'll have a podcast kind of debriefing that one. If things change, you'll maybe know about it when they come out, but we'll update schedules as we go, and then we'll be posting it to Instagram as well. So for this episode, this is explaining the format of how I kind of went about getting some of the work that I did, and then just basically kind of showing my work, and then just going over a couple guys who, I don't like doing honorable mentions, but I figured this is a good exercise to go over guys that are very valuable but are never going to make these like top, they're never going to make the sexy lists. But they are going to make some people's lists. That is another thing I'm not saying will never happen. So, Finn, before we started, were there any not options, but talking points that you wanted to start with, maybe with specific players?
Not specific players, but a grouping of players that I did not rank in my top 50. I do not think you will rank in your top 100, and that is international players who have not played a season in the league.
Yeah, so rookie players, I did this last year. I didn't rank anybody who had not debuted in the major leagues. And typically I'm a little more hesitant on previous year rookies as well. Last year I was pretty sure that Yoshinobu Yamamoto and Shota Imanaga would probably be top 100 guys, but I didn't rank them last year in my top 100 because they hadn't played in the major leagues yet. I just want to, give a little bit of shout out to some guys. It opens up a couple roster spots at the back end of a list rather than me putting in a guy who hasn't played in the big leagues yet. Because we're here to celebrate the good things that certain players do. So those guys will not be present. Like Hiroki Sasaki will not be present. Ha-Seong Kim, not really a super high-profile international guy, but he would also not be there. And I don't think he would quite be good enough to be there anyway. But another subsection of guys, I guess, relievers are almost impossible to make present here because in order for a reliever to make a top 100, they typically have to be the best reliever in baseball on just a production basis, and the ability to predict the best reliever in baseball, it's not very easy to do year to year. So for that reason, it's very unlikely I'm ever going to rank a reliever in these rankings. Not because I'm not saying these guys aren't good. It's just, your average, I don't know, like an average Josh Hader season is probably, a little bit out of a top 100 spot versus the peak seasons are definitely, pushing up a little bit higher, maybe towards 80. But it's really hard to just predict that somebody's going to have a top 80 season as a reliever. So there will be no relievers present. I guess this is the time to talk about relievers. Emmanuel Clase, Cade Smith was also considered. Mason Miller was considered. Devin Williams, Edwin Diaz, just because he has had one of those, top 80 seasons. And then I did also consider guys like Josh Hader in there, just off of good merit of track record. So hopefully I didn't miss anybody right there. That's kind of the reliever shout outs that we're going to do. Do you have any other like subsection players to start about before we go forward to how I kind of, or before I go to a couple more subsections? Okay. So a couple guys, I guess we'll talk about guys who just missed that, I considered them worthy, but I didn't um, ultimately finish with them on the list. And then we're going to kind of go over why I was a little bit less confident to put them on a list like this. Um, so to start, two guys that I want to go over because I considered them, for context, I considered about 110 position players and 30 pitchers. So, a lot of players that I took into consideration here. Ultimately, I have 100 spots. This is why we're doing this extra episode. Two guys who were left off. They, I would say, are the two most extreme players in Major League Baseball, and that's Luis Arias and Kyle Schwarber. Previously, I have ranked both of these guys on lists. It's just this past season was for both of these guys was down standards, or down in terms of their normal production. Luis Arias this past year, his on base percentage dropped below 350, which doesn't sound like necessarily a bad thing, but previously, like, he's creeping up, you know, close to 400, and that's what brings him value on the field, because it's not him hitting for a high average that brings him high value. It's him hitting for a high average to support his, middle of the pack walk rate, or in some cases this season it was third percentile walk rate versus, in 2022 it was league average, and then in 2023 it was quite poor. Arias also made a move positionally to first base, and his defense also just didn't grade out well at first base, so that hurts him on a defensive value aspect. And it was just a down year for him. If he returns to maybe a 2023 form for him, even at first base, it's probably, a back end of the top 100 guy, but he doesn't bring much base running wise or fielding wise. He brings even less fielding wise than he did in 22 and 23, considering he plays first base now. And then Kyle Schwarber, I'll say this, his, you know, on a pure like red dots basis, which means, based off of how well he's hitting the ball, he still looks about the same. It's just I have a little bit of concerns. Schwarber would have been one of the more interesting guys to rank. He's just quite literally, when he's played, been such a poor defensive player that it makes him less valuable defensively than DHs who don't play the field. And then base running wise, he has just nothing. So those are those two guys. Do you have anything to add on those two guys, Finn?
With the Ryans, your base running has to be like three. Your on base percentage has to be like 350 if it's the only thing that you're good at. The
Yeah,
only reason you are there.
it's his on base percentage, right?
Yeah.
Okay. And like I feel like for context, Kyle Schwarber was 100th out of 105 players that I had on the spreadsheet in base running, and then as a glove, he was 102nd out of 105. So his bat was honestly pretty solid, but it's just really hard to get those, a player with that level of negatives on the glove and base running aspect into the list. And then Arise is a pretty similar situation where he's even, like, for context, he's below Schwarber defensively, and then as a runner, he's a little bit higher, but he's 81st. So two players that you don't love to have. Uh, you
Was
like their bats.
Stanton better or worse than Schwarber and Maestro? It was kind of similar.
So Stanton was not a guy who I even listed. I did mention him in the other episode that we did a couple months ago that I do like what I see going forward with Giancarlo Stan. It's just Stan has not had the success in the past 3 seasons that would even warrant him of a spot. So I just was like, hey, I'm not gonna predict that he's going to have the success when he's never had it, even though I do think that it is possible that he does. Um, Basically, all of the guys who I, put in consideration for this list are guys who I have previously had, um, plus they've had top 100 seasons in the past couple of years, and Stan just hasn't had one of those. So it's the rationale on Stanton, I guess. Good thing that he came up here in case there were any questions ever about him. He wasn't a guy really on the radar. Um,
I would not have had him ranked very highly at all, but I could have seen the argument if you put him 100th or 90th.
yeah, I could too, especially because, I 99th percentile barrel rate is kind of crazy for Giancarlo Stanton, and a 509x slug is also really good, but um, it's just really hard to rank a DH who hasn't had a good enough offensive season to even justify putting him there yet, even though I do think he could have better ones going forward. So that's Giancarlo Stanton for you. For pitchers, like I said, I considered 30 starting pitchers. 4 of them did not make the top 100. Aaron Nola, Kevin Gossman, Tyler Glasnow, and Shane Bieber. So if I had to group them, Aaron Nola, Tyler Glasnow, and Kevin Gossman were 2 guys who their career trends are looking not too great right now. So that's why those guys weren't included. If I had to think, if I extended this to a top 150, like they'd be in the next 15 names to, get put on. And then like Shane Bieber and Tyler Glasnow. Bieber, there were a little bit concerns about the Tommy John, and then he had previously already had a little signs of decline, and then Glasnow has just never been a healthy guy. And I think a guy who's on the thumbnail too that I didn't even really consider was Jacob deGrom. With him and Glasnow are very similar. Like they've never really been healthy for you. So that's those 2 guys. Yeah. Do you have anything on those starters, Finn?
Yeah, not surprising. Health, it really does.
Yeah,
You'll see that when I rank certain guys that could be a top 5 player in baseball, but they just have nothing on the field.
for sure. Yeah, like
Certain
if
fish.
certain fish. Yeah, I think the fans know which one you're alluding to, Finn. Yeah, it's hard to rank guys who are never healthy, and I have a couple of I guess twins specifically that I do rank, but I would say I have a little bit more um willingness to see a healthy 25-year-old third baseman than a early 30s, early to late 30s starting pitcher who has never been healthy. So that maybe alludes to somebody who I did rank that honestly might not even be a guy who typically gets ranked for a lot of people. So yeah. Did you have any specific questions on any of those starters
Yeah,
between
I have
Glasnow?
another statement. I think we both agree that a healthy Jacob deGrom is a top 100 player. The thing is, I don't know if there's going to be a healthy Jacob deGrom, and I'm leaning towards no.
I've always been a big proponent of, current injuries or previous injuries are not going to be the best predictor of past injuries, but repeated injuries is a great predictor of future injuries. So that's why I end up in that situation. Yeah, I don't like injuries, and I like to assume guys are fully healthy. I rank guys when they're fully healthy, and if I do think there's a likelihood that they're unhealthy, they get docked for that a little bit, but not super frequently. I guess I had another group of hitters that I definitely wanted to go over. So yeah, let's just sort by this. I'm gonna go over a couple of the other guys, and then we're gonna go over formula on how that worked. So there was a group of, I would call, I'd say a group of four shortstops that I think previous seasons have had top 100 seasons easily. And I understand arguments wanting these guys to be ranked. But Zach Neto, Ezekiel Tovar, Jamie Pena, and Anthony Volpe are guys who I think on their floor will probably be, I don't know, like their floor is probably in the top 100 somewhere, but I don't think that there's much ceiling with those guys. Like, if I had to say two of those four guys are going to be top 100 players next season, it's just, I don't think any of them have shown anything to where they're going to be significantly higher than 80 realistically. Um, there's a lot less upside with those bats, or in the case of Neto, maybe the glove I'm a little less sure of. But yeah, there's not as much upside with those bats because all of those guys, if I had to predict a ceiling, like their ceiling is a league average hitter versus some of the guys who, end up like firmly on this list, like they're 10-15% above league average. I think just for context, the second to last guy on this list is, and honestly, the last guy are guys who I would expect to have a 120 WRC plus if they're healthy. So, those shortstops, did you have anything on those couple shortstops?
There is some that I just need to see more out of. I can't justify it.
Yeah, and I was always a big believer in Volpe as a prospect, as a hitter, because I thought he could really hit as a prospect. So if some stuff really turns around with him, I would be very willing to rank him in the future. But just he never he hasn't quite put up the ceiling for me to want to just push him right into a list. So um. Couple more hitters. Bo Bichette, and he missed the list. Um, there were a couple guys ranked a little bit higher that there was one guy specifically that I was pretty similar on, and that's Luis Robert. I think they had similar seasons result wise. I think Robert was a little bit better um, than Bo Bichette. Um, and I just see a lot more upside with Luis Robert, but Bo Bichette was, I think, the last guy to get pushed off um, when I was pushing guys off the list. So that's why, Bo Bichette didn't make it. He had a rough most recent season. Traditionally, the glove has just not been that great with him, although it has gotten better, and it was kind of decent in 2024. It hasn't really been that good in the past, and I don't think the ceiling's too high with Bo Bichette versus at least Luis Robert. He's a guy who's like, a top 30 guy in his peak. So that's where I come to with that. On Bo Bichette, Finn, how do you feel?
Bo Bichette, he just has not. He had a massive decline that makes me wonder if he ever gets back to that ceiling he once had.
I agree. I was just always like, I was always kind of the low guy on Bo Bichette. And then, I think the most recent list I did, I think I had him around 50, just outside of the top 50. And that was kind of as high as I had ever gone with on Bo Bichette. And it, it bit me in the ass, to say the least. He didn't cut it. So maybe I'm just being a little spiteful because it didn't work out the one time I believed in him. But yeah, that was Bo Bichette. I guess just another couple call out honorable mentions. Jeff McNeil. He was, would have been another guy who was pulled off the list like more. He was one of the more recent guys to get pulled off the list. He was kind of in a clump at the bottom with a couple of the guys who did make the list, but he has a little bit more upside. It's just the way he got to the results this past season bring me a little bit of concern. Like, he ended up at like a 97 WRC plus last year, which honestly is pretty good. And then for a second baseman, that's above average. It's just, the expected numbers don't really reflect a guy with any higher of a ceiling. And they even say he probably outslugged his traditional power. So I'm holding out hope that McNeil has more, especially as a Mets fan, but I think he's maybe more in line with like Volpe and Neto, to where like this may be a league average best case scenario. So couple more guys I wanted to at least throw out there. Teoscar Hernandez, Anthony Santander. These are guys who have, hit really well in the prior year. I think they are the guys with the two highest WRC plus in 24 to not get ranked. I'll see. I doubt there's anybody ahead of them that had a higher, or I guess Schwarber was higher. But yeah, those are the two guys with the two highest, and Jerks and Profar as well. And then I'll clump Brian Reynolds in with these guys. These are just corner outfielders who probably shouldn't be playing corner outfield. And then whenever they get moved to another position, I'll reevaluate how good they are defensively. But they kind of stink defensively, all of those guys do. So yeah, that's those guys. And then I highlighted him because I really like him, and he's a guy who I had ranked, previously, and that's Tristan Casas, because I think if we get a healthy season of Tristan Casas, he has 35 homers. So, and hopefully that's not a Nolan Gorman-esque take. I hope not, because Nolan Gorman was not in consideration this year after being ranked like 74th last year. So hopefully my shout out of Tristan Casas doesn't come to bite me in the ass, because I didn't even rank him. Yeah. Any questions or just any other guys who you want to shout out that you don't think are going to make the list?
Honestly, with Casas, I can see that
I hope it happens. It would be
because
great.
of how when you look at the sample size ratio.
I mean, he's done nothing but hit. It hasn't been like an elite hit. It's been a very good hit. And I think among first basemen, um, let's see.
He also doesn't have that. I forget exactly what it was, but Nolan Gorman's strikeout numbers were very, very, very abysmal.
Yeah, and like you said, I Casas isn't as, you know, he's not as extreme in as far as striking out goes. Among first basemen, I don't. Let's see. First base. If I sort by first baseman, Casas ranks. Um, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. He ranks 7th among all first basemen in my offensive metric. So that's legit. He's over a couple guys who are actually ranked on the top 100. It's just we haven't seen it enough from Tristan Casas. So Tristan Casas, I guess, do you have anything else before we go forward and talk about, I guess, the formatting and how I ended up with the answers that I got? All right, so formatting. So to start, like I said, I got all the players that I would consider, and I basically collected a ton of stats. The key concept hitter-wise that I wanted to focus on was how good of a hitter are you relative to your position, because that's essentially what most of this is. What most of every player evaluation is how good of a hitter are you relative to your position, and can you stick at the position. So I got WRC pluses for 2024, 2023, and then 24 or 22 through 4. So like a combination of all three. And then I got the league average WRC pluses for every position over those, those spans of time. So 23, 24, and then 22 through 24. What I did from there is I would set, instead of 100 to be league average, I would set the position WRC plus to be league average. So Aaron Judge had a 128 WRC plus in 2024. So the average right fielder in 2024 had a 103. So then I would divide 128 divided by 103, and then I would get 212. And then positionally, I would take whatever position the guy is either played the most the past season, or if there's, general, not general, but reasonable doubt that they're going to play a different position the next year, I would take the different position. So for Aaron Judge, it ended up being right field because of their offseason acquisitions. I think he's going to play more right field next season. Then I think the bat stuff is pretty similar. After I got those three, so 24 position plus is what I ended up calling it, 23 position plus, and then 3-year position plus, I would take the average of those three plus the highest of those three to get what I call bat plus. what the reason I take all three is so we get a sample size over 3 years, and the reason I take the highest is so we get a kind of feel for the upside that certain guys have. So their highest possible season for Aaron Judge, it would be the 218 in 2024, or the 212 and 24, and then that's how I would get to Bat Plus. And I think it did a pretty good job of ranking who the best hitters in the league are. I did this as well for glove and run, is what I ended up calling them. To start with base running, I took BSR from Fangraphs. I thought it was the easiest to do. It's from 22, 23, and 22 through 24, but it was like an average of the three, essentially. So like so for Aaron Judge, he had a negative 0.4 in 24, a negative 2.4 and 23, and then his average over the past 3 seasons was a negative 0.6. Then I did the same formula that I did for Bat Plus, but with the Run Plus, with these three things as the numbers, and then it would end up with the Run Plus. And then what I would do is, because some guys would end up being negative, I would take the lowest number of negative, which ended up being 4.9 essentially, and then I would add 4.9, so then nobody would have a negative Run Plus, because it would later on affect how some of the overall rankings ended up working, because some guys would have, it would basically fuck up the formula, so I would have to do difficult math versus easy math. Then defense, I would take I took two defensive metrics, because I think defense is kind of hard to evaluate. I took Fangraphs defensive runs, and then Statcast's fielding run value, and then I would what I would do after that is I would get the 3-year fielding run value, and then the 3-year defense, and then I would find the average of those two, and then that would give me their glove plus rating. And then that is essentially how I found those. I had two calculations for overall. I had a total calculation and a percent calculation for hitters. The percents were Bat Plus was 75% of the ranking, Run Plus was 5%, and then Glove Plus was 20%. I came to these numbers because WRC Plus has a 75% correlation with winning. That's how I came to that result. So that's how I did it. I had one more thing to say about hitters before I forgot. And then I had total. That's what I did. I had total, which was just the adding of Glove Plus, Run Plus, and Bat Plus. And then I for the percentile ranks, or for the percent ranks, I would make the 95th percentile 100. So like for 75 percent, if you had over the 95th percentile in Bat Plus, you would get a 75 for Bat Plus. So that's how that works. Then I would roughly use my percent rating and my total rating to determine where the hitters should end up, and I would use Statcast data to kind of verify if certain things are sustainable. You heard us talking about it a little bit today, when I bring up sustainability with Arias and Schwarber. Maybe those profiles aren't super sustainable over year to year, and then I don't see the floor or the ceiling with Volpe, Neto, Pena, those type of guys. And then yeah, that's what I ended up with. Pitchers. Pitchers or Finn, I completely ignored you here for a second. Do you have any questions on that process? I guess you're kind of representing the viewer here because you did not witness me doing this entire process. So how do you feel on how this formula worked, and do you have any questions?
No, but I like how you did it, and the logic is kind of sound.
Okay. That's what I aim for. So sounds like I'm doing a good job. And I let the Excel calculator do as much of the calculating for me to make sure there was no human error involved. Pitchers. Pitchers is hard to rank because at the end of the day, what we're trying to calculate is a run prevention prediction and an innings pitch prediction. The thing is, typically, your innings pitched is going to be very correlated with your run prevention. So it's kind of hard to just, say a guy's never pitched 190 innings in their career, so they'll never be able to do it, or they'll never come anywhere close to doing it. So for me, I'm just trying to figure out some type of certainty on both innings pitched and run prevention. And then pitchers here, like age and injuries are like a huge part of pitchers. So what I would do with pitchers is I would go in and essentially look at the stats, because I can't get like a huge formula for pitchers like I can with hitters, because hitters are more year-to-year predictive, or year-to-year predictable. And basically I said a reasonable floor estimate of their innings pitched and run prevention if they are healthy for the entire season. And then I would divide the innings pitched by the run prevention, and then I'd get a pitcher rating. I'm not done with this pitcher rating though, because there's more to do. Then I would find 6 categories, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah, 6 categories. How often they reach the innings pitched, how often they reach the run prevention, then what is their injury status, major injuries concerning, and then minor injuries, their age trend, and then their career trend. And then I would give them a certainty score between 0 and 4 for each of those, and then I would add it up. Then I would take their certainty score divided by 24 and multiply it by their pitcher rating, and then I would multiply that I would divide that by what I think is a standard peak ERA for those guys. So that's how I ended up with pitcher ratings. It ended up looking pretty similar to how a lot of people rank pitchers anyway, so that to me sounds like I did a good job. I'm interested in what you have on pitchers, and I probably do need to clarify a little bit more on the pitcher stuff. So did you get lost in that process at all? Do you have any questions?
Yes. How do you get run prevention? Did you get it by just looking at their ERA plus?
So I would take so here you go on Fangraphs and you see ERA, FIP. You go ERA, FIP, xERA, FIP. Are you talking about the peak ERA or the average ERA?
Average.
Okay, so the average, the way I would determine it is I would look at those numbers over the sample size. If the ERAs are, pretty consistent, I can kind of just say, hey, that's what the ERA is probably going to be. If there's a differential between the FIP and the ERA, I then would go to StatCast and try to figure out what that rationale would be. Sometimes guys just never give up hard hit balls. Sometimes guys get a shit ton of ground balls. Sometimes guys get lucky, and that's when you end up with crazy Cy Young seasons that you don't expect. So yeah, that's how I would come to those answers. It would be very different depending on each pitcher because not every pitcher's the same. But that's how I would come to that standard. And then innings pitched wise, I would basically take the rate in which they're pitching per start over the past 3 to 4 seasons. And then that would kind of be the average of that would be what I would end up getting. And then if I had to lower it based off of more recently, they've been, on pace to throw 180 innings versus 195. I would do that instead. Let's see. Where else could you have gotten lost here, Finn?
Honestly, that's just where I got lost.
Yeah, and then the peak ERA is kind of me saying if everything goes right for this guy, like what's the ceiling, run prevention wise. Obviously, with the peak, I obviously didn't max guys out at a 1.7 because I think that there's serious talent strides needed for guys to go to a 1.7. Like, I don't think I would predict anybody right now to have a 1.7, but that's how I end up with those answers. And then, yeah, I feel like I ended up with pitchers in a way that a lot of people would end up with them. And I wouldn't take necessarily their overall pitcher rating. I guess it's not pitcher rating, but their overall. I didn't even come up with a name for it.
Pitcher rating doesn't sound bad.
Pitcher rating does not sound bad.
Because you're talking about how you would rate them as a pitcher.
We're calling it adjusted pitcher rating because it adjusts for the peak. That's what we're calling it. I didn't stick strictly to pitcher rating, but I followed it pretty closely throughout the end. So yeah, and then there were 30 names considered. Yeah, I like how I ended up. Like for context, Aaron Nola, he was unranked. There were 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pitchers after him on pitcher rating, adjusted pitcher rating that I ranked ahead of him. I didn't stick truly to what my numbers were, but I used my numbers to kind of give myself something to reference off of when accumulating the names, because I previously would just accumulate the names off of the past 3 years on Fangraphs, but instead of doing it that way, I wanted to accumulate hitters and pitchers in a way that would already do some of the work for me, right? So before, if I see a 120 WRC plus, I would then have to say, hey, is this from a second baseman? If so, that's excellent from a second baseman. Or, oh, this is a first baseman. That's good. Bat Plus already does that for me. So.
Or a bat plus that is above average for a shortstop could be terrible for a DH.
Yeah, so that's not necessarily true because your league average shortstop is going, or your average shortstop is going to have a lower WRC plus than your average first baseman. But in the case of Bat Plus, it already weights guys relative to their positions. So I don't have to do that reassigning of, hey, it's extra valuable that this shortstop hits really well, or it's extra valuable that, or it's less valuable that this first baseman hits super well. So yeah, that work's kind of already done for me. I just have to sift through that along with the run and the glove and decide how likely it is that those results will be repeated again. So you're kind of right, but you were more talking about WRC plus than BAT plus. Yeah, and that's kind of just how I, worked towards, getting the answers. This is how I got the answer choices out there for me, and then I picked the answers for the top 100. Um, I'm hoping that my answers didn't suck. I hope that they were right, because I know this time next year, we're going to be grading my answers, and hopefully they're good. Do you have anything else on this topic in general? Yeah, do you?
No.
Yeah, so I mean, this was what I would assume is not a quick episode, but a relatively shorter one than what we normally do. Next week, Finn's 50. We'll for sure talk about Finn's 50 and my 100 through 76 will be out on the channel already. I'm sure we'll talk about that a little bit next week. But yeah, that's that for right now. Hopefully you've started to see some shorter form content coming out on the channel. Yeah, we will see you guys next week in Finn's 50 episode.